Just thinking about it. There we go. All right, so we are live, everyone. Welcome in for all of you joining us on YouTube and Facebook. We really appreciate you joining in there. And of course, we really appreciate all our groups, families, teachers, and otherwise joining us live in the broadcast today. If you guys have been able to check out any of our other Duke Lemur Center broadcasts over the last few months, it has been awesome. From Laura D.R., Lydia Green, Matt Borth, all sorts of amazing researchers, educators, and more, highlighting the wild, wonderful world of lemurs. You can check out all those broadcasts on our website. We're going to have on our YouTube channel, you're going to have a playlist of all the Duke Lemur Center presentations there very shortly, if not already. But yeah, welcome today. I'm particularly excited about today because today is like the coolest thing that we can possibly be doing with lemurs. We are at the Duke Lemur Center in North Carolina, and we are going to be exploring the Lemur Forest with Education Programs Manager Megan McGrath. So she's going to take us through. We're going to see some of the coolest, most endangered, wildest, most beautiful primates in the entire planet. So I am so excited you guys can join us for this. We're going to do Q&A at the end. So if you're on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to share your questions in the chat bar. I'll check them out. I'll pass along as many as I can. And without further ado, let's dive in with Megan and take us away. Thanks so much for joining us, Megan.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here, first of all, in the forest, and also be there virtually with you all.
Fantastic.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce myself and why I look like this first. As you all are very well aware, we do have the global pandemic right now, and there is some evidence to suggest that lemurs might be able to contract COVID-19, as well as my fellow staff members. So we are being very careful with who's on site, and whenever we are within 6 feet of another human being, another animal, we are wearing these masks. So I hope you can hear me okay. There also happens to be a highway near this enclosure. It's plenty far away. There's plenty of space between it and the lemur's habitat, but it's very noisy. So I apologize, it's a little bit noisy this morning. And without further ado, I'm actually going to go ahead and flip my camera because very, very soon we're going to have the lemurs joining us. And I know that's really what you came here to see. All right, there we go. So right now you can see that we are looking at a patch of forest. So we are in Natural Habitat Enclosure number 6. Now we number them because we have 9 different natural habitat enclosures. And that just means that we have a bunch of forest here at the Duke Lemur Center. It actually is sections of the Duke Forest, part of the university's grounds, that we have sectioned off for the lemurs to use as habitat. The reason we've sectioned them off is because we actually keep the lemurs in pretty controlled, tight groups. So in this forest, we have 3 different species. And if you can hear the musical sounds in the distance, you can actually hear our primary caretaker for this forest today, Kate. She is actually shaking maracas. Sounds a little silly, but the maracas are actually how we tell the lemurs, hey, it's breakfast time, time to come out into the forest. Now, these lemurs didn't really need to be reminded because they actually were already waiting right up at the building for their food. They know exactly when breakfast time is. They are surrounded by a forest full of food, but Kate's got their usual favorites and kind of their staples in their diet in those bowls. So you can see she's shaking the maracas. And we have ring-tailed lemurs following her very close behind. And then we have cockerel shafak bouncing along behind her. So you can see the cockerel shafak are moving a little differently than the ring-tailed lemurs. So cockerel shafak are bipedal, meaning they are 2-footed, 2-legged like us, like humans. But unlike humans, their hips are rotated out to allow them easier movement through the trees. So you can see they hop along and they land kind of grabbing and holding on to those trees. So Kate's going to get them settled really quick with their meals. And I did tell Kate she didn't have to talk, but then I realized I wanted her to introduce who's who of the lemurs. So sorry, Kate, for surprising you.
Got Stuart right up here on the left, the male ringtail, and then Elena is our female up there in the trees. A little bit difficult to see. She likes to sit up there and pop out a little bit. And then our folks over there, we have on the left Beatrice, who has the black radio collar on, and then the companion Elliot is on the right, who's on the gal.
Thank you.
Collared lemurs should be showing up shortly right behind us.
All right, and I've got the collared lemurs down because they're actually the most exciting residents in this forest this year because they're brand new. They moved out to the forest this year. So I'm gonna let Kate continue getting the animals settled, and then I'll kind of introduce you to the species and the individuals kind of one by one. So since we have Stuart right here cooperating, we'll come in on close up on him. Now, ring-tailed lemurs like Stuart, I like to joke that they're the poster child or the token lemur. You see them at every zoo that has a lemur collection. They are the standard representation of what a lemur is. And ring-tailed lemurs are wonderful, but the big thing I want people to remember is that they are just one of over 100 species. So this is not the only lemur you're going to see if you go to Madagascar. In fact, there are many, many more, and they can look very, very different from this. Now, what Stuart is eating right now, get a little closer to that, that is what we call a primate biscuit or monkey chow. There's various nicknames for it. But basically, that is a type of food, kind of like a dog or a cat food. That food is specifically made for old world primates or lemurs. You can use it sometimes for monkeys or apes, but we know that it works really well for lemurs. Of course, they're in their own category, but there's some overlap with their fellow primates. And I like to joke that during a zombie apocalypse, I could actually come here and raid that stash of primate biscuits and probably survive off of it pretty well. Although it pretty much tastes like wet, slightly sweetened cardboard right now, so not my first choice in meal. But as you can see, Stuart doesn't mind at all. And I also want to point out on Stuart, you can see there's a collar around his neck. Now, I don't want that to confuse people to think that Stuart might be kind of like a pet, because we do keep collars on our pets at home. Lemurs are definitely not good pets, but Stuart here is living out in a big forested habitat. There are over 4 acres for him to explore here. So let's say today the weather hadn't cooperated with us and it had been very, very rainy outside. There's a very good chance Stuart would have stayed huddled up with his girlfriend all the way up in a tree, staying nice and dry under a nice canopy of leaves. And maybe said, you know what, Kate, I'm not hungry enough to come down for breakfast this morning. In that case, Kate has the option to use that radio collar, which emits a radio signal, to track down where exactly in the forest they are, so that she knows where to look up in the trees and count the 2 ringed tails huddled up nice and warm to know that everything's okay. They just didn't feel like coming down because it was really rainy this morning. It's very rare that they don't come down for breakfast. They really enjoy breakfast, but it's still good for her to know where they are and have that backup option in case they don't feel like coming down. So that was our ring-tailed lemur highlight. I'm now going to walk over so we can meet the cockerel shafak. Seems that the collared lemurs are having a slow morning getting out of bed. All right, here we go. So they've switched places. We have Beatrice on the other side now. She's got the black radio collar on. And the reason she's the only one with the collar on is that her mate here is pretty much going to spend all of his time with her. So he really likes spending his time with her. That's his job because he's the boy and girls are in charge. So he goes where the girl is and he makes sure he stays with her. So we can use that to plan where our radio collars go, because those radio collars are pretty expensive. So you can see he's very curious about the camera. So he's staring. So we're getting a really good view of his face. He's also doing some scent marking. He climbed up that tree just a moment ago and he rubbed his chest. Here he's going to do it a little bit more for you. Right there on his neck, that is a scent gland specific to male cockerel shafak. So he's got a scent gland right there on his neck. And you'll also notice he kind of rubbed his butt on the tree a little bit. And that is something male and female cockerel shafak have. They have a scent gland there. There he goes, scent marking. So he's just making sure it's clear this tree is his. And he didn't show me any signs that he was particularly mad at me. But you'll notice I did back the camera up a little because he seemed to be really staring at it and scent marking a little. So I just want to be sure that I'm respecting his space. Because as I mentioned, these guys are not pets. They are not comfortable with humans getting too close. So I took that as maybe a clue. He was saying, you're a little close. Oh, there we go. They've decided to go over and see what the ring-tailed lemurs have for breakfast. Now, the breakfast these 2 species eat is very different. So it's not infrequent that they will sneak over to each other's bowls because, of course, the food is always better out of somebody else's bowl. But you'll notice that she went first, and then he is waiting behind, not quite hopping over there yet. Now, part of that is he's curious about the camera, but the big part of that is that, again, she's in charge. So he said, oop, she settled right where I was going to leap. I'm not going to try to leap right where she is because I know she's probably going to smack me out of the way. So he made the choice to come back over here to his own food bowl. And you can see that the ring-tailed lemurs, instead of trying to squabble over their bowls, they've just taken their nuggets of food up a little higher in the tree. So they can still eat in peace. And they'll probably come over here and steal what's in the cockerel shafak bowl in just a minute. So I'm actually going to come over and show you a little bit of what's in that bowl. So they've already eaten the good stuff this morning. And the good stuff is usually their protein. It's either beans or nuts. When they're out here in the forest, it's going to be beans. We save the nuts for the really special occasions when they go back in the building twice a week to do what we call lockup, which is where they voluntarily go back in the building with Kate. When she shakes that maraca, she leads them inside, and then they get their favorite foods for going in, usually for just a few minutes. She shuts the door to the building, and then they get their food, and then they can go back out on their merry way out in the forest. That's the way we make sure that they know how to come back in when we need them to, especially during the winter or maybe during hurricane season if we have some really bad weather coming in. The other parts of the food in here, you can see there's a very different looking chow. It's very small, hard pieces of food. That's called a folivore chow, meaning a leaf eater chow. So that's for primates that mostly eat leaves, like our cockerel shafak over here. And then you can see some little remnants of red cabbage. I think, yep, there's some cucumber at the bottom there and some cauliflower. So those clearly aren't their favorites today. Some of their main favorites would be sweet potato and carrot. So those usually get eaten right away. And then they also eat leafy greens, kind of like we do, things like mustard greens or collard greens or kale. But much like most of us, it's not their favorite part of their meal. So they kind of dump out their least favorite part of the meal so they can get to the good stuff. And then they'll come back and snack on it later. Oh, and our last group is joining us. And these guys are going to be a little tricky to see until I get close to them because they actually happen to camouflage pretty well in this forest. So right here we have Odette. She's the mom of this collared lemur pair. And you can see she's eating, she was eating a primate biscuit like our ring-tailed lemurs. So a more similar diet to them. And then over on the other side of the tree, hiding for just a moment, is her son, Dozier. Hopefully he'll come back out here in just a moment. He's usually not that shy. But collared lemurs are a type of ewe lemur. There are many, many species in the ewe lemur genus. So they're related to lemurs like mongoose lemurs, crowned lemurs, and you can kind of see that if you're familiar with those species by the shape of their body, the shape of their face. But this species is actually sexually dichromatic. I'm going to give them a moment to get settled, and then I'm going to see if maybe I can get a little closer. But you can see Dozier came out from behind the tree to grab that nugget of food that Kate very nicely tossed in a nice direction for us. And if you saw when he came forward, he looked a little bit different from his mom. So this is Odette coming up closer. She's going to grab that nugget of food right there. She's a little bit lighter than her son, and she's got a very soft orange chin. Whereas Dozier, who's giving us maybe not his best angle in the back there, he's a little bit darker, especially on his face. He's got a dark black face, and he's got really puffy orange cheeks. And as I mentioned, these two are first-timers out in the forest, so it seems maybe they're a little shy about me doing this virtual tour. They haven't really experienced that because, of course, we have the pandemic right now, so we haven't been able to do any tours out here as long as these guys have been living out in the forest. So this is a bit of a new experience, a human standing here talking very loudly while they're trying to eat their breakfast. So I'm not going to push it if they don't feel like coming very close right now. So we'll let them hang out in the back there. And I think maybe now is a good time for me to pause and see if anybody has any questions about our lemurs so far.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much so far. What a really cool tour. So we've got over 50 people watching. We've got Costa Rica, UK, Canada, all across the US and more. So thank you to everyone who's tuning in. So our first question I'm going to take from Facebook actually is from Mila. She wants to know why they would follow
that question was why they what? Very good question. So that is just conditioning. So the maraca itself is not that interesting. But the way we taught them is that we shook the maraca before giving them their favorite foods. Then we shook the maraca before giving them their entire meal for the day. So if you've ever heard of Pavlov's dog, where they ring the bell and the dog salivates for the food, that's some classical conditioning. We do classical and operant conditioning here. Sometimes some of it is unintentional classical conditioning if a fire alarm goes off when we're nearby. But that maraca is just associated with the food. So the maraca on its own, not all that interesting to a lemur, except maybe if they were curious about what the noise is. But to these lemurs living in this particular forest, the maraca equals food. If we were to go to the next door forest, it would be something different. It could be their bowls clanging together. Sometimes it's whistle tones that we use, or a bucket with a bunch of their biscuits inside. So the sound is specific to the forest. That way these guys don't hear the maracas shaking in their next door habitat and think, oh no, they're feeding them across the way and I can't get to my food. So we have to make it specific to each forest.
Fantastic. How cool is that? Thanks, Megan. So what we'll do is we'll dive into questions with all our groups. I'm going to keep your mic muted just for a second because that ends the reverb for a second. So we'll start it with questions, and if there's anything that the lemurs are doing that you want to interrupt question you take us to, make sure you do that. We're happy to stop and pause on these really cool animals. Let me head to Miss Sullivan's class, Vestavia Hills, Alabama. So nice to have you guys in, and yeah, we'll bring you into the stream here and go for it with your question.
Thank you so much. We have a chat box going on for questions, and I don't have a lot yet, so you may want to come back to me later, but I do have one. I have a student wanting to know if they bite.
That is a question we get So that is a question we get all the time. And I've gotten that question over the years for all the different animals I've worked with. Now, for some animals, it's really obvious, like lions and tigers. We know those guys bite. My general rule is that anything with a mouth can bite. It's just a matter of whether or not you provoke it or whether or not it's going to be dangerous for you. You may not think that lemur bites would be all that much to worry about, but there's a reason we respect their space. It's not just because we appreciate the lemurs and want them to feel comfortable. It's also because these cockerel shafak over here have teeth strong enough to crack right through the outer shell of a walnut or any other really hard nut. They love to eat acorns out here. So these guys have really strong jaws for their diet, but they also can defend themselves with those jaws. So they definitely can bite. They are not aggressive towards people as a general rule. But one of our rules for living out here in the forest is that they mostly ignore us and don't worry too much about us, because a lemur bite would be nothing to laugh at if it happened.
Fantastic. I'm so glad we got that message in. And yeah, it's something we get from all our live animal interactions. Just respect animals, and you're unlikely to ever end up in a situation where you're likely to get bit. So that's something that holds true for lemurs, it holds true for sharks, it holds true for anything, whether in the wild or in a facility like this. Great question, guys, to kick us off. All right, I'm going to go to our family in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They got some really cool toys that they might want to show you too, Megan. So I'll bring in Lars, Rune, and the gang there, and they can show what they got for you.
Hi. 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 We have one question. Do you want to ask? How often do you see stink bites?
How often sorry, can you repeat that really quick?
Say it again. How often do you see stink bites?
How often do you see stink bites?
Stink bites.
Stink bites?
Stink bites.
I know what she's saying. It's a real term. She's not making it up. They got it right. So stink fighting, for those who don't know, is a great topic to bring up. So I'm actually going to focus again on our ring-tailed lemur over here, even though she in particular is not a stink fighter. Is this? Yeah. So it's actually something that the male lemurs will do. So you can see Stuart over there. He'd be the stink fighter. He's a little further away from the camera. So stink fighting is a ring-tailed lemur behavior that is fascinating. What they do is they pull their tail up in front of their body. They rub it with the scent glands they have on their wrist and on their inner shoulder. And that scent gland is really stinky and smells only like Stuart. So when he wants to make sure another lemur knows, hey, this is my territory, or hey, this is my girlfriend, or even funnier, if he wants to flirt with a lemur and convince her to be his girlfriend, he'll do something called stink fighting. And once he's pulled that tail in front, rubbed it to get it nice and stinky, he'll stand up nice and tall, and he'll wave his tail over his head, and the stinkiest lemur tends to win the stink fight. So we don't see a huge amount of stink fighting here because we keep the lemurs separated into different troops. So there's usually not a lot of discussion about whose territory they're in. But my favorite thing we do see, there's 2 times we see a lot of stink fighting. And one is when we actually go back up towards the building. there is about a 10-foot gap between this forest and the next door forest. You can actually just see the fence through the trees. If the lemurs happen to go up to that fence and see other ring-tailed lemurs across the way, they'll do what I like to call trash talking across the fence. And some of them actually do it pretty regularly in the afternoons. You can't find them, you know, oh, they're probably trash talking with the next door lemurs at the fence. But it's all in good fun because they can't actually reach each other across that gap. And the other thing that's my favorite time we see stink fighting is when they actually go back to the building. We do have some surfaces that are reflective, especially our windows on the doors going into the building, or sometimes we'll give mirrors as a form of enrichment. So it's something fun for them to play with. And in that case, you actually can see a lemur stink fight with his own reflection, and it's pretty funny to watch. But luckily, it never goes past a little stink fighting since the guy on the other side of the reflection never seems to retaliate too hard.
Awesome. Great question, guys, to lead in with something like that. You did some research on ahead of time. So I'm going to go to Ms. Albrecht. I'm going to go to, yeah, sure. Let's go check in with her. I'll bring it in. And then we've got our Montessori school in Texas. We've got our group in New York. So if you guys want to ask questions, let me know in the chat bar because I know there's some issues with your mics earlier. But let's bring in Joy right now. And if you have a question for us, maybe. You're welcome to ask. While we're waiting for that too, and I can always come back to our other classes in a minute if not, for anyone on Facebook and YouTube, if you guys have a question, do let us know. We'd love to take some from there as well. So Joy, yes, if you have a question for us, go for it.
I'm just checking it out for my classes that start in a couple weeks.
Perfect. Well, glad you're in. And if you have any questions at any point on behalf of them, let me know. By all means, share. But nice to have you in the broadcast.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, let's go back to Miss Sullivan's group then in Vestavia Hills. If you guys have another question for us, let's go for it.
Yes, I have another student asking how long they can live.
Perfect.
That is a great question. It's actually a longer answer than you would think. So as I mentioned earlier, there are over 100 different species of lemur recognized in the wild. And those species of lemur can range in size from the size of a mouse, so literally 2 inches tall, and fittingly, they're called mouse lemurs, all the way up to the indri, which is a very amazing animal that you will only find in the wild in Madagascar. And that animal is about 3 feet tall, or maybe 4 feet if you stretch them, if you had them stretched out with their arms and legs all the way stretched out. So they're pretty tall. They're probably as tall as some of the students who are joining us. So how long they live really varies just as much as how big they can be. Something tiny like a mouse lemur in the wild tends to live maybe 5 or 6 years, although it can be hard to say across the species because other things that would affect that would be their habitat, their food availability, any threats facing them. Here, our lemurs tend to live about twice as long, if not sometimes 3 times as long as they would in the wild. And a big part of that is that, you know, Kate comes out here every morning feeding them the perfect diet. She checks on them. She's actually still here watching the lemurs, making sure everybody looks okay and they're moving okay. And if she sees anything that's even a little bit off, she's going to let our veterinary team know. They're going to be out here to look at them. They get all the care they need right away. If they get any parasites, they can get treatment for it. So they get a little bit pampered here, so they tend to live a little longer. But back to your question about exactly how long, let's use these guys as an example. So we have cockerel shafak here in the wild. I think the data's a little fuzzy, but they can live up until their mid-teens is a really nice old age, maybe early teens. But here they can actually live just into their 20s. It's pretty rare that we have them go much further past that. This is a very delicate species. Oh, and you're seeing some really good social grooming right there.
Nice.
Now down here are ring-tailed lemurs. They're going to live a little bit longer in the wild, mid to late teens. And then here in human care, they actually can live up into their 30s. Our oldest lemur we've ever had on record, I think, was about 37 years old. It was a ruffed lemur. So again, they can live quite a bit longer here. So that's my long answer to your question.
That's a great answer. By the way, for everyone online, if you, Megan mentioned something called the indri. When you're done this broadcast, don't interrupt it right now, but when you're done, go and listen to the Call of the Indri online, INDRI. It's one of the most amazing things you'll ever hear in nature. So check that out when you're done. All right, I'm going to ask a question from Facebook, Megan. So Patrice wants to know, stink fighting, what animals are lemurs related to? Like, what a weird behavior, what a weird adaptation to have. Is there anything that you can share, or maybe other creatures that do that?
So this is a complicated question to answer. So stink fighting is particular to ring-tailed lemurs. So it's not something you'll really see in other lemurs in that exact same form. And to answer the question of what's related to a ring-tailed lemur, that depends on how related you mean. Technically, ring-tailed lemurs are the only lemur in their genus. Their scientific name is Lemur cata. And there are no other lemurs in the lemur genus with them. It's a little confusing. You'd think there would be more for that particular genus. But if you look at these guys right here, the cockerel shafak, their scientific name is Propithecus cockerelli. You actually might have heard Kate refer to them as propes earlier, so that's the affectionate nickname that we have here for them as a reference to their scientific name. And then over here, we have Lemur calaris. So we actually have quite a few different species here that are pretty distant in terms of close relations. But then when you go much further out and you look at what is a lemur most closely related to, well, that would be other members of the primate family tree. And these guys are very, very early primates. So they're related to the earliest of primates. So way back when the age of mammals was just getting started and the age of reptiles was ending and the dinosaurs' time was ending, that's when you start seeing little mammals enter the world and get a little bigger. And that's when you start seeing primates come into the world. And so these guys, their most close relatives living today are something called strepsirrhine primates, or we kind of refer to them as prosimian because that's a little easier to say, but honestly not much. And that basically means pre-monkey. So they're going to be related to bush babies in Africa, and they're going to be related to lorises in Asia. And if you want to learn about some really strange adaptations involving scent glands, I highly recommend you look up the slow loris because they're pretty fascinating too.
Fantastic. Thank you, Megan. All right. Let me check in with Violet ever so quickly. So Violet's joining us in Mamaroneck, New York. If you have a question for us, I want to bring you into the broadcast. I know we couldn't get your mic working earlier, so just letting you know if you have a question, you're welcome to ask it now or type in the chat bar if you have anything and I can share it that way. No pressure, and if not, that's totally fine. So for now, just keep it in mind. That's all I'll say. I want to ask one more question from YouTube, and I'll go back to our Pennsylvania family. So our question from YouTube is, they missed this, and they want to know, why aren't the lemurs escaping? Like, why aren't they running through all the forests of North Carolina? How do you keep them there, Megan?
That is a very, very good question, and one I was honestly surprised by the answer when I came here. My background before this was working with, as I mentioned, big cats, small cats, very different animals with very different kinds of habitats, much sturdier enclosures for good reason. And I came here to the Lemur Center and I saw the fence lines here and I said, how does that even work? So the fence line here is actually about, how tall? 8 feet? Yes. So it's about 6 feet of actual fence and then a couple more feet of a netting. And the netting across the top, we're not standing nearby it, but you can see it distantly through the trees over there. Yeah. The netting across the top actually has a light electrical pulse that runs through it. So that light electrical pulse is not enough to harm the lemurs, but it does feel really funny when they touch it. So they don't enjoy touching it. So that little jolt they get if they touch that netting keeps them from climbing up and over the fence. The other thing we do with that fence line is we cut the trees back at least 10 feet on either side, usually closer to 15 feet. So that means that across the fence, you've got a gap of about 25 to 30 feet between the trees. And luckily, we know how lemurs move. We know they either climb up and over something or they leap across to another tree. So as long as we make sure the fence lines stay nice and clear and that electrical pulse is working, we can keep them in their habitats.
Super cool. All right, I'm going to go to the Montessori School in Allen, Texas. I know you guys have had some trouble keeping in the broadcast, so I want to come to you and see if you have a question for us. So if you do, go for it.
I'm actually in our science room right now, so let me get down to a classroom and then we'll have one for you.
Perfect. Okay, good luck. Hopefully it holds. And worst case, check in on YouTube or send me an email and I'll take a question that way, okay? Good luck.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. All right, well, in that case, let's go back to Lancaster, Pennsylvania for a question from you guys. Again, you got such awesome toy lemurs. I want to make sure that you guys get some cool questions in, so go for it.
Okay. Do you want to ask?
Are the trees in the Lemur Forest forest the same kind of trees in their natural habitat in Madagascar?
Good question.
You have such excellent questions, sir. So the lemurs here are very used to the trees here, but they can be quite different than the trees in Madagascar. Of course, there are lots of different trees in the forest. Just here, we can see some tall pine trees. We can see some smaller deciduous trees. That's the trees that drop their leaves when the seasons change. So we have quite a variety of trees here, but in general, we have deciduous forest in front of us. Now, for an animal like the cockerel shafak right here, that's a great forest to spend their time in because they're from the west coast of Madagascar, where you find dry, deciduous forest. So pretty similar to what we have here, just not quite as wet as what we have here. And these guys eat lots of different types of leaves from the trees. So in Madagascar, they've been observed eating over 100, I think even more than that, different types of leaves. And here they eat plenty of different leaves as well. In fact, there's a researcher, you guys may have caught her talk earlier in the summer, Lydia. She specializes in studying the types of leaves that they eat, how it affects the gut microbiome that they have, and all those fun things. So I highly recommend checking out Lydia's talk on her research and the research we do here. And then if we look at another lemur, like our ring-tailed lemur, all the way up there, I'm actually going to point him out for you because he might be a little hard for you guys to see. Right there on the branch. So our ring-tailed lemurs, they actually live in a much harsher environment in the wild. They live in the spiny desert region of Madagascar, way down in the south, where you're going to see a lot more dry, desert-like conditions, much more harsh plant life that has giant spines, very little moisture, very little food and leaf content to offer. So arguably, they might like it even better if they had the choice between living there and here with this pampered lifestyle. They actually get a lot more easy access to food here than they would in the wild. Actually, we think that's part of the reason they do so well in human care and why you see so many ring-tailed lemurs in zoos all across North America, because they're a very hardy species. They live in harsh conditions out in the wild, which means that they're really well suited for really well-trained human care by zookeepers because they're really hardy little animals, as opposed to the cockerel shafak over here. You'll very rarely find them in other facilities because I like to call them the divas of animal care. They need a very special diet. They need very special veterinary care. We actually freeze multiple giant chest freezers full of fresh leaves every summer so that each day of the winter we can hand a branch of thawed leaves to every single one of our cockerel shafak. So very different conditions for both, and they would live in very different places in the wild. So for some, this is very much like the wild. For others, like the ring-tailed lemurs, it's very, very different. Oh, and really quick, I want to point out, that's not just one lemur on the branch now. That's both of them huddled up in a little lemur ball. So I'm going to see if I can get a little closer so you can see it.
Nice. We're sneaking up on the lemur ball together.
There we go. So this is a common behavior after we eat. We snuggle up for an afternoon nap. Sorry, I'm moving a little slow. I'm going through lots of spider webs here. There we go. So you can see they're huddled up. There's two tails draped over their shoulders, and they're grooming and probably going to take a nap soon. So this is very good, very important social bonding stuff.
Nice. Megan, this has been so much fun. You're killing it. You're getting so many questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, the lemurs do most of the work.
Well, I don't know about that, but we appreciate the sentiment. All right, let me take a few from YouTube and Facebook now. Great questions pouring in. We'll come back to our live groups in a minute. Again, Joy, Violet, if you guys have any questions, do let me know. And let me know in the chat bar if you can type in the chat bar right now, because we're still getting used to StreamYard. So the more we know, the better we can make these broadcasts for you guys. So Lily wants to know if ring-tailed lemur babies are born with the rings on their tail.
So the question was if ring-tailed babies are born with the rings on their tail, I believe?
Yes.
Yes, they are born with those rings on their tails. And for the most part, I can't really think of a lemur species that looks all that much different in coloration when they're babies versus when they are adults. I think all of the species are pretty similar. The one exception is our sexually dichromatic species, like the collared lemurs that we met earlier. In that case, everybody looks just like mom when they're born, and then the males will only start to change color if they're going to change color as they start to get older and they get more hormones and it's also less important for them to blend in when they're riding around on mom. So for the most part, everybody looks pretty much like this, just very, very tiny when they're born.
Nice. All right, so we've had Akash join us, our favorite lemur lover, all the way in Vishakhapatnam in India. So it's our 5th country of people that are watching this broadcast, which is super awesome. So he wants to know how well lemurs are able to adapt to a new location. Like if they come from somewhere in the wild, they end up here, how do they adapt to that? How do they make that transition?
Sure. So as with most of my answers to the questions, that does depend. I do want to point out the lemurs living here, with the exception of, I think, 2 lemurs still living at the Lemur Center, all the rest of our over 200 lemurs have always lived either here at the Duke Lemur Center or in another facility in human care at another zoo or somewhere else like that. We are part of a network of other facilities as part of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So most of the lemurs living here, with very few exceptions, have only lived in human care. So they're very used to it. How much they can adapt to change does depend a little on how much change they're used to when they're younger. So if you were to bring an adult pair of cockerel shafak, like these guys, out and try to teach them how to be in the forest, it would take them a lot longer to adjust to being in the forest if they've never been in one before. Yep. But if one of those lemurs happened to grow up as a baby, riding around on mom's belly and mom's back in a forest, they would have learned how to be in a forest from mom. And we actually have a lemur named Pompeia, who's a great example of this. She's 11 years old, and when she was a baby, her first summer here, she rode around on mom's back, learned how to climb through the trees with mom, and got really good at climbing through the forest. Then, after a while, she moved into a different habitat that had some indoor and some outdoor space. And about 9 years later, we decided to teach her and her daughter how to free range again in a totally new forest. And Pompeia went right back to it. It's kind of like that saying, just like riding a bike. She did great. She knew exactly what to do in the trees to leap around. But her daughter, Francesca, who had never been in a forest before, was really clumsy. And we may have made some jokes about using hard hats in the enclosure on the first couple of days. But we eventually got the hang of it. It just took her a little bit longer. So the basic answer is, if they've been used to a changing environment when they're younger, they're going to be much more comfortable with a changing environment as they get older. But we make sure that we never put the lemurs through anything here that's going to stress them out too much. And there definitely have been cases where we've tried to introduce them to the forest, and believe it or not, they might have found the forest too stressful or a little bit scary at first.
Yeah. What a great story, Megan. Thank you so much for that. What a cool tale. Just a quick note, and you highlighted some really cool things about the animal care and the rigor that goes into that there. This is something that I want to stress to everyone who's watching. Every time we do a zoo, an aquarium, amazing facility like the Duke Lemur Center, people always inquire about the care of animals. One thing you can look for anywhere in North America, and I think around the world, if I'm not mistaken, is an AZA certification. So it's the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and what it means is that the animals are held, that there's the highest standard of animal care there, and you can pretty much be sure that there's good things going on at that institution. So AZA accreditation, CAZA in Canada. So check for those, and you'll see that animals are being as well cared for as they are here at the Duke Lemur Center. So that's awesome. All right, we're going to take a few more questions. I'm going to go back to Miss Sullivan's group in Vestavia Hills, and then we'll do a few more to wrap up. So Miss Sullivan, come on back in and go for it.
Thank you. My group has really been sending a lot of questions. The biggest one was about weight. We heard that they can be all different sizes, and they were wondering about the weight range that they are, and if the size only affects that, or if male-female affects their weight.
Nice.
So I love that question because it gets into some good talking points about lemurs when it comes to male and female differences. So when it comes to weight, you can range just as much in weight as you can in size. Lemurs are about the same density all the way across their size, so their weight tends to go up as they get really big. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the injury are up in the range of maybe 30-ish pounds, maybe a bit more. I'm more familiar with the lemurs we have here, clearly. And then if you get down into the tiny mouse lemurs, they are really, really small. We measure their weight in ounces versus in larger measurements. And so when they're born, a mouse lemur weighs about as much as 2 pennies. So they can be really, really tiny. When we look at the weight for the males versus the females, you might actually be able to see a little bit here. these two guys are actually about the same size. There's not much difference between them. Same with the ring-tailed lemurs we met. The collared lemurs, I think Dozier might be a little bit smaller, but that's mostly because he's a little younger than his mom. So lemurs are actually not different in size between the male and the female of the species. There's a very interesting talk that maybe we can convince our curator of the Fossil Primates Division, Matt Borks, who's done some other talks here. Maybe he could talk about that in a future session, but basically, you don't really start seeing a difference in the size of male versus female primates until you get into the monkeys. And that's something that comes along later in the primate evolutionary process. So in lemurs, we think that's one of the big reasons that you see so much of the females in charge. So for most of the lemur species, the girls are in charge. They're the dominant ones in the group. And when you get into later primates, especially once you get into animals like baboons or especially gorillas, there's a huge difference in the size and a huge amount of what we call sexual dimorphism in the size between the males and the females. And that's when you start seeing a lot more of the males being in charge because they're taking on that role of protecting their troop and making sure that everyone's safe. Whereas in the lemurs, the girls are in charge because they're just as good at defending their troop as the boys are, and they're the ones having the babies. So they want to be in the best feeding spots, getting all the best food. They want to be in the best sleeping spots, curled up right in the middle of the lemur huddle so they can be nice and warm and dry all night. So that's a big difference you see between lemurs and later primates.
Fantastic. Great answer. All right, we're going to wrap up with two quick questions that are really easy, sort of softball questions to end us off. Megan, I'm amazed we haven't got this yet, considering how cool all the things you've been showing us are. But how would someone end up on your job? If someone wanted to be you and they grew up, how would they go about that?
So I love this question because it can be different for every person. The main answer you'll always get from anyone who's in this kind of field. So whether you are a zookeeper, whether you are an educator, whether you're doing both, you can fill pretty much any role in a facility like the Duke Lemur Center. You know, the Duke Lemur Center needs web design still. The Duke Lemur Center still needs someone to do our IT. We still need someone to do our maintenance. So my one recommendation is don't think you have to do just one job to help in this field and help contribute to things like conservation and excellent animal care. And the other recommendation is if you want to do a job really close to the lemurs, so if you want to do what I do, where you get to teach people all about the lemurs, or if you want to do what Kate does, where you get to take care of the lemurs, the biggest thing you're going to need, I would say even more important than the school you go to and the things you learn about in school, are going to be internships and volunteer positions. This is a field where you really need experience to know what you're getting yourself into. Being a zookeeper like Kate is a very rewarding but very, very hard job. And it doesn't always look like what people expect it to look like. So experience is the number one thing that I would recommend you get. And just like you mentioned earlier, you can look for other AZA facilities, or you can just check out facilities near you, see if you like what they're doing, see if the animals look happy and well cared for, and see maybe if you can learn from them and start getting an idea for what you want to do.
Fantastic. Those are my two favorite answers to that question whenever we get it. So thank you so much for that, Megan. And then last but not least, as we come close to the end of the broadcast, we're getting more questions than we could possibly share in one session. So where can people go to learn more about what you do specifically, about the Duke Lemur Center in general, and just about lemurs?
So I'm very excited to answer this question because I have two very good answers. One is that we have our own social media. You can follow the Duke Lemur Center on Facebook, on Instagram. You can check out our website. If you search Duke Lemur Center, or honestly, if you just search the word lemur, you're probably going to find our website as one of your top results. But it's also lemur.duke.edu. And a very exciting addition we have to that website, we now have a bunch of virtual programs, including a full virtual tour that's a whole video series that teaches you all about each of these lemurs, all about the work that we do here. And we even have options where you can do your own private Q&A. So if you have a bunch of questions that you didn't get to ask me, you can schedule one of those and you can ask me all the questions you want.
Outstanding. So we had the Duke Lemur Center website on the bottom of the page. We linked to your social media on our social media pages. And of course, there's a bevy of amazing videos with the Duke Lemur Center and their amazing staff on our YouTube channel. So check those out when you're done. Before we wrap up, I just want to highlight a program that we're starting in about a week and a half now, all September long. We are going to be doing our Backyard Bio Initiative. So not all of us get a chance to go to Madagascar, see amazing animals like lemurs in the flesh. Of course, hopefully when they open up back again to the public, you can go to the Duke Lemur Center and see them there. But whether you're at home, in a backyard, a local park, whatever, check out backyardbio.net. We're having a really cool program where you can share observations of wildlife all around the world, connect with other classrooms and more. So we encourage you to take part in that if you get a chance. And with that, I just want to turn it back to Megan and say a huge thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. I'm going to wave from here because I want your parting shot to be the curious cockerel shafak. But I've loved showing you all the lemurs today, and I hope maybe I can see you guys again virtually in the future.
Awesome. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone.